I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. You had to be there. You hear that said a lot, but in the case of something like New York City's 42nd Street during the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, it's actually true. If the only New York City you know is what's there for the last 20 years, what you've been seeing, it's virtually impossible to get your brain around what it was like back then. The block between 7th and the 8th Avenue was called the Deuce, but it was also called cinema's most notorious block in the world. There was a row of theaters that showed movies that were so lurid and so explicit and so violent, no mainstream theater would ever show them. And the environment inside these theaters could be just as crazy as anything shown on the movie screen. Now, this is when Grindhouse Cinema got the reputation it holds today. You had to be there. And our guest on the show today was there, here to talk about Exploitation Cinema, the Grindhouses, and the New York City of that period is 42nd Street Pete Chiarella.
Well, Scott, thanks for having me on. I'd love to share some of these sleazy memories with you here.
I can't wait. I'm sure the listeners are going to feel the same way now. Pete is the creator of Grindhouse Purgatory magazine, and he has his own line of retro porn DVDs, and he has written books on 42nd Street and Grindhouse. So I guess first question everybody's asking that's listening right now, how did you get the name 42nd Street Pete?
Well, actually, the whole thing started as a joke on Mike Vraney from Something Weird Video. I had a video store up in Rockaway, New Jersey called Past Midnight Video in an indoor flea market. I had met Mike at the Chiller Theater conventions when they first started going back to 90. And the problem was with his stuff, everybody wanted it, but his price point was wholesale was like $15. My retail was like $15. So it's sort of like, you put something in an Amray wraparound box that was really easy to knock off. And I admitted to him at that point that I was, knocking some of his shit off. And he says, nah, you shouldn't do that. He goes, I'll trade you. What do you got to trade? I says, well, what are you looking for? He goes, 8mm stag films. Well, it so happens back in the day, I was selling a lot of this stuff. I mean, that was basically my sex education back then because, when you grow up in the 60s, there's no such thing as sex education. So I had been selling this stuff and I had a stash of them. So basically I had traded him, a loop for a tape. So that kept, I could sell him at $10 a piece and he got product. So I said, what are you doing to introduce this stuff? And he goes, well, we got Bucky Beaver. So one night I got half shit-faced. I set up a camcorder, put on a trench coat, put on a fedora, put on dark glasses, and sat in front of the camcorder and went in this whole spiel about, 42nd Street's dead, but thanks to Something Weird Video, it's alive. And I was basically pulling out a switchblade, a handgun, a bag of weed, all kinds of other dumb shit. And me not thinking anything of it, I just sent the tape out to Mike. So about a week and a half goes by, I get a phone call, and he goes, I got your video. And I'm like, he doesn't sound too fucking happy about this. And I go, oh, did I piss you off? And he goes, no, I think this is great. He goes, I want to use it on the intros. He goes, can you write? And I said, well, yeah, I can write. And he goes, I want you to review, the loop collections, the Bucky Beaver, loops. So I, said, okay. He sends me basically 20 VHS tapes, which is basically 40 hours of porn. So I'm like, all right, well, maybe this could be an opportunity. So I started doing this shit, and I'm like, I can't fucking watch this shit straight up. And I'm thinking, then I'm looking at these damn things, and I'm like, wow, this is memory lane, because I sold some of these fucking loops. So then I had an idea. I said, why don't we do this first thing in the morning with the VCR on fast forward? I'll take notes and do it while I'm having my coffee. Well, that worked. So I went through 40 hours worth of this shit, reviewed it. And then it went into Frank Henenlotter, and Frank, came back with me and he goes, listen, we want to sell this shit. We don't want to discuss people. He goes, no fucking crab jokes, no stuff like that. I go, fine. He goes, can you write something for the Blue Book?
Tell people what the Blue Book is.
Well, the Blue Book was their catalog, their X-rated catalog. Mm. It was Bucky Beaver's X-rated catalog, the Something Weird Blue Book. They had, they were putting out double features, single features, the loops, softcore, hardcore, whatever. And I said, well, what do you want me to write about? He goes, write about 42nd Street.
Right.
So I didn't even know how to type back then. So basically, I sent Frank Henenlotter 32 handwritten pages called The Devil's Playground, about 42nd Street. So Frank left a message on my voicemail. This is the greatest thing ever. This is going in the book. Every quotation, every paragraph, every comma. I'm like, oh, he's got to be stroking me. So I called up Mike and I said, is he fucking serious? And he goes, he loves it. He goes, it's fucking great. So the book came out. It got a lot of rave reviews. It got written up in Screw. So Mike calls me up and he goes, we're going to do a second one because he had more product. Mm-hmm. So I did more loop reviews. I did Devil's Playground Part 2, which was basically me hanging around the Deuce for 12 hours. And I timed it from maybe 6 o'clock at night to like half o'clock in the fucking morning. And then he goes, I want you to interview Vanessa Del Rio.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, I never did a fucking interview before. So actually it was Lisa that was going to do it, but Frank talked Mike out of it. And he goes, Pete's the one we need because Pete's not going to pull any punches, this, the other thing. So I said, all right. Mm. So again, I was at the East Coast Video Show. They had already set this thing up. So Vanessa was down there signing autographs. I went up, I introduced myself. We had a picture taken of us flipping off Rudy Giuliani, which I couldn't find. And I made a deal to tape this thing. Well, I taped this thing. I got 3 30-minute tapes, and I used an answering machine. And then somebody told me, he goes, if you tweak her, she might get pissed off. So I called up Frank, and I go, what do I do if I piss her off? He goes, keep the fucking tapes rolling. So this is where I learned how to really do an interview because I did my fucking homework on this shit. I tried to find out as much I could about her, and I got her on. And it wasn't a question of not getting her to talk. It was a question of shutting her up because I filled 90 minutes worth of shit. For whatever reason, it was like a hiccup. Nobody really said anything about the next magazine. So that was Mike really had nothing else for me to do. And, they were going on to other things. So, here I am. I used the character, when I was working at Chiller Theater to do stuff. Because, it was a known name.
Something weird was such a godsend to guys like me because I just missed the boat on the first run of the 70s Grindhouse. I was showing up in Times Square and 42nd Street around 85. So it's not the same animal at that point. And Vrainy really opened a lot of doors because a lot of those movies started to actually come out under his label. And now when we first met, it was when I went to Cinema Wasteland like 2 years ago. And I have to admit, I was intimidated when I heard your name and I saw your table because every bit of knowledge I had was like in the first 3 or 4 covers that I looked at. And, you could have been named Hollywood Boulevard Pete or Tenderloin Pete or fucking AFI Pete. I wouldn't have been skittish at all. But for anyone who remembers the legend and the reputation, even in 85, 42nd Street Pete is a statement. Now, were you born in the city or did you get there later?
I got there later. I basically what happened was I grew up in Jersey. I graduated high school in 1970, but I had been going over to the, East and West Village when I was like 15 to drink underage. That was the big attraction, underage drinking. So, you take the bus, you go into Port Authority. Well, one time, instead of, making the right turn to go to the subway to go to the village, I made the hard left and went up on the corner of 42nd and 8th. And I'm looking down and I'm seeing this smorgasbord of fucking movie theaters with all this great shit playing like, the spaghetti westerns were just coming in, biker films like The Wild Angels, For a Few Dollars More, Find a Place to Die, Minnesota Clay, Django. Then, you had your softcore porn, your hardcore really didn't really, it was hardcore around, but they really weren't showing it. It was underground shit with the loops and things and the peep shows. Hardcore really came in after Deep Throat in 72.
Right.
So you had all this wonderful shit. So basically the other thing was Vietnam War was still going on then too. And I was classified 1A. So that meant that sooner or later my number was up and I was going to go die in a fucking jungle. So that didn't really give me any incentive to do anything with my life. So I just became a regular over there, just going over there, hanging out every fucking weekend, every chance I get. You get half shit-faced, stagger around the corner and go to a movie. And then I met basically a cast of characters over there and people I hung out with that I'd say my tenure lasted from about like 1968 till the mid-'80s. And then I stopped being like a customer and a purveyor of certain things and then went into the business. So
Right.
probably as you were coming in, that's when I was heading out.
Yeah.
Because that's when you were 85 was sort of like the tipping point where we're starting to get really fucked up and dangerous with crack and AIDS and all the other shit going on.
Now, you were there for like the term Grindhouse actually being built. So, I mean, that gets tossed around liberally these days, the term Grindhouse. A lot of recent low budget movies claim to be Grindhouse. I have people who send me emails saying that they'd like me to talk about their Grindhouse movie. In your opinion, though, what makes a movie a legitimate Grindhouse?
The time period it was made. So basically, all these people that are making, quote, Grindhouse movies aren't making shit, because in order to make a Grindhouse movie, you would have to take a time machine and go back into that era. And the other thing, too, is the guys that made these films, guys like H.G. Lewis, Dave Friedman, Ted V. Michaels, Al Adamson and shit like that, were rebels. They were working with their own money against the system. They were getting screwed on distribution deals, but they were making stuff that basically went in these theaters. And, the term Grindhouse came from Dave Friedman, explained it to me, was a theater that ground films out almost 24/7. Mm-hmm. There was a couple places in New York that were actually, they ran 24/7, like the Harem, that little shithole shoebox theater on 42nd, close to 8th, which fronted for a video store. That was upstairs, and that thing never closed. A lot of the theaters would run, like, okay, the Venus is a famous one. The Venus would open 10 o'clock in the morning and close at 7 o'clock in the morning, giving it 3 hours to sweep all the crap out from the night before. So, and people would go, well, why would a movie theater, and these are mainstream movie theaters too, not only the porn joints, but the mainstream ones, they would start showing movies at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And the reason why is because the city never sleeps. Shifts get off, guys go have breakfast, they want to go to a movie before they go home and sack out. So there was always something going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing that you're talking about, those distinctions, because a lot of what makes Grindhouse was there before, but then mutated into something. Because, exploitation movies, all-night movie theaters, 42nd Street itself, obviously around a long time before the 50s and the 60s. And I mean, the 42nd Street theaters used to be palaces. The New Amsterdam was a beauty to behold. Liberty Theater was where D.W. Griffith showcased Birth of a Nation. That's where it got premiered. But by 1981, it's showing Umberto Lenzi's Make Them Die Slowly. So there were a lot of changes. What do you think? And I like how you talked about the Grindhouse, because Grindhouse, the way that I was told about it as well, because Dave Friedman's book, Youth in Babylon, is magnificent, where you're basically hearing that, people used to sleep in there and stuff long before it started getting the dangerous reputation that it has now in memory. What do you think were the ingredients that made New York City and that time period the right time for Grindhouse to become Grindhouse, the phenomenon?
Well, what it was like you say, those theaters were all, opulent at one time. They just fell, on hard times. And what happened was a chain called the Brandt chain bought up a lot of them. And, these guys were looking for stuff to put in there. And, there would be, people would ask me, what would you consider a Grindhouse film? And I said, there's a lot of different genres, Western genres, biker films, karate films, sexploitation, softcore, hardcore, women in prison, Nazi films, cannibal films. I mean, there's all kinds of subgenres, right. But those were the films that would run there. And, sometimes a film would run 2 days and get yanked because it didn't draw any fucking business, and they write it off as a tax loss, and that was the way they did business. Guys would try to outdo each other in terms of showmanship, which you don't see anymore today. I mean, they had these huge plywood fucking, fronts with, heads hanging off them and dismembered things and cannibals and shit and blood and guts. And there was shit that, it drew you into the damn theaters. You didn't have this shit advertised on TV. You'd walk down there and go, oh, fuck, I got to see this, So what was your first kiss? What was the movie that got you addicted to going to the Deuce to watch? Actually, I was going to these Grindhouse things long before the Deuce. See, there was something. I'll back up a little bit so you can just see how fucked up things were. There was something called the Kiddie Matinee when I was growing up, and basically the Kiddie Matinee was 2 movies, 3 Warner Brothers cartoons, and a 3 Stooges short. And that was the babysitter back then, because for $1.50 you could drop 2 kids ages, 8, 9 years old, and nobody would fucking bother them. You couldn't do that today. But you drop them in front of the Grindhouse with their money, go in and pick them up at 5 o'clock. Now, luckily, my parents, which were Catholic, didn't really check the damn movies. They thought it was Disney shit, Jerry Lewis and things like that. The first matinee I went to was Curse of Frankenstein, Horror of Dracula.
Nice.
So I told my little brother, I said, you better not open your fucking mouth about what we're seeing. So that was the whole, thing, because where I saw it, it was a place called the Embassy Theater in Orange, New Jersey. It was an old, big, fucking opulent theater. But there's where you had, because of the low price, and there was a union thing too, where they had to run matinees, whether anybody was even in the place or not. So sometimes I'd cut school and it'd be me and 3 drunks in the back, winos. They weren't homeless guys, they were winos. They buy their pint of wine, pay their buck to get in, go in the back, get shit-faced and sleep till they got kicked out. So that's how it started. The film that kicked my ass into the whole thing would have been Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
It came out in 68. I was in high school. I didn't see it in 68, but everybody was coming back with these horrible stories about, oh my God, you won't believe it. They were eating this cop. They cracked him open. They were sucking the marrow out of his bones. There was a dog running with his head. All this horrible, nasty shit. And I'm like, with my buddy, I go, we got to fucking see this. Then it came around again in 69 on the bottom half of a double bill with Slaves. So me and this guy named Tom, we went down to the embassy. We sat through Slaves, which sucked. And then the music for Night of the Living Dead comes on. And we both turned around and looked at each other, and I'm like, maybe we should get the fuck out of here while we can. So no, we sat through the fucking thing. We were scared shitless, and on the way home had to cut through a cemetery. So, yeah. And that film scared me so much that I went back the very next day and saw it again.
Nice.
This might be weird, but, we didn't have home video back then. So I would have to say, and me dragging people to see this movie, I'd have to say I've seen it in the theaters close to 100 times.
I never got to see it. Well, I finally, after years and years, got to see it in the theater. I first saw it on TV in Pennsylvania. And I have to say I had a bad attitude about the movie when it first started because it's in black and white and it's all in one spot. And me being a guy from, Pennsylvania, I'm like, this is the best we can do. A black and white movie with a TV set on 2 chairs. And it took a while for me to actually get it. And it was about the time when they're beating the zombie back, hit him in the face, shoot him in the face, and he's rolling backwards, and you start seeing all the other zombies out in the grass. And it started really getting under my skin. When I first saw it, though, I hated it, and then I couldn't get it out of my mind. I just had to go back to this movie again and again and again. And when you're talking about the theater, I did the same thing. I had a movie theater that I went to see the shorts and things like that. They were still doing that when I was around. And most movies only lasted a week at that time. It was a big deal for any movie to last 2 weeks. How long did movies usually last on 42nd Street?
Well, here's the thing, and this goes back. People don't realize they released movies on Wednesdays, not Fridays, Wednesdays. And Dave Friedman told me the reason they did this was they wanted to see if the damn thing had legs by Friday, because if it didn't draw by Friday, they were going to yank it out and put in something they knew would draw. So, like I said, sometimes you'd see something to be there for 2 days and you never fucking see it again on the marquee. The other thing was, too, that something could be playing on one side of the street one week and be on the other side of the street the next week.
That's great. I didn't know that. So let's talk a little general exploitation history. Obviously, exploitation goes all the way back. First movies of Thomas Edison, he electrocutes an elephant, he fakes executions. But one of the more important names in the growth exploitation is Kroger Babb, who took exploitation on the road with a few other folks after the production code was established. Basically, I think Dave Friedman called them the 40 Thieves. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Dave Friedman actually made me the 42nd Thief. It's true. We were sitting in Chiller one time and he made... Mike Vraney was the 41st Thief, and I was the 42nd Thief, which was cool. I wear that like a badge of honor.
No kidding. So you knew Dave Friedman. How'd you guys meet?
He came to Chiller. We had sat down. I had told him that I had actually worked for General Cinema for a summer managing a drive-in, which wasn't the dream job you would think.
Right.
And he remembered that. We were going back and forth, and Dave was just a nice, gregarious guy. He put on no airs. He knew Mike Vraney was bootlegging him. He got a hold of Mike and threatened to break his legs. And Mike turned it around saying, Mr. Friedman, I'm so glad you called me. I want to put out your movies legit. So, of course, Dave didn't buy it because Dave was old school. And all these old school guys were so used to getting ripped off. So he gave Mike a couple things. And then when Mike gave him a check, the fucking floodgates opened. He hooked him up with everybody he knew. Harry Novak, Herschel, some other guys. They were getting tons and tons of stuff put out. So I used to call Dave every Christmas Eve. I think it was his birthday was Christmas Eve. Huh. And we did get him the Wasteland. He was having, his wife had passed away, and we thought that would have been it because he was really close with his wife, but he held on. And we actually did get him out to Cinema Wasteland. He had a great time. He was great with the fans. We had a great panel with him and Dave Hewitt. And, like I said, I kept in touch. And, the guy was, he was a genius. Unfortunately, his second book got screwed up and they don't want to publish it. And I think they lost part of it. But if you read A Youth in Babylon, you'll just see, how good this guy was. I mean, he could have been an executive at Paramount, but he wanted to do the exploitation stuff. He made his own movies. He hooked up with Dan Sony, another exploitation guy. And, they went on the road. And it's like, to me, it was a privilege to know the guy. Sadly, my last conversation with him was, he's always gregarious on the phone, and his voice dropped a bit, and he goes, something? People weren't meant to live this long. Mm. Then I think he had an accident. I think he was in a nursing home, and he passed away on St. Valentine's Day. And I was in touch with his niece, Micah, who was basically taking care of him. And she said, it's okay, Pete. He would have wanted it this way. Remember St. Valentine's Day Massacre? So that was Dave.
Yeah. So I think he was in the Army with Kroger Babb, wasn't he?
Actually, he was in the Army. I think he was in the Army with, that was Russ Meyer, I think. I think Kroger, he might have picked, he wanted to work for Kroger. I think he wanted to get into the same thing. I'm shaky on those details, but I know he was in the Army with Russ Meyer because he introduced me to Russ at Chiller.
Oh, no kidding.
So, there's two icons right there.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had hooked up with Herschel. They were doing these nudie cutie things. And that's how Russ started, too, with the Immortal Mr. T's and stuff like that. So they were doing, these dumb nudie movies. And then, all of a sudden Hollywood saw the dollar signs and they, the code was gone by then. There was no rating system still. So, they said, well, Hollywood got us. What can we do next? And they came up with Gore. And they did Blood Feast. And they didn't think that Blood Feast was going to do shit till they went to the drive-in where it was playing, and the line to get in was wrapped around the block. So I think they had done it was a Gore trilogy. They had done Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, then Color Me Blood Red. Then I think they split. Herschel did a bunch by himself.
Wizard of Gore.
Mm-hmm. And then Herschel went into direct marketing for a while. And the thing was, when Chiller first started, Herschel was, I believe they brought him out to the second show, and he had no idea. The thing is, none of these guys had any idea there was a market for any of this stuff after its initial run. None of them. Nobody envisioned home video. Nobody envisioned television. Of course, they weren't going to run Blood Feast on television anyway. Nobody envisioned any of this stuff. So these guys were pretty much shocked to find out that they had fans. They had fans. And, this was the early days of conventions. They appreciated their fans. And that's where I met a lot of these guys.
Talking about like Dave Friedman again, his career, I think, is kind of amazing.
Go ahead.
Because he was at ground zero for the creation of a lot of the exploitation genres that you mentioned before. I mean, you talk about nudie cuties and gore and the sex and violence mixed. He had roughies like the Defilers and the Sweet Sickness. And I think the first one that he did was Scum of the Earth with Herschel, right? That would be considered a roughie, that mixture of sex and violence where the violence is really kind of disturbing.
Well, I think he did. He wanted to do the ultimate roughie. And I think it was didn't he do the Defilers was his without Herschel?
Yeah, that's a rough one.
he wanted to do something. He goes, I want to make the ultimate roughie. And if you pick up that what is it? That's Exploitation DVD. I think that's the last thing he did before he passed away. And I think he said something about that was he wanted to do the ultimate roughie, and he did this thing called the Defilers.
He was also the producer of Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, but under a pseudonym, right?
Yeah, Herman Traeger. He yanked his name off that real quick. I don't know. I don't know whether it was a purposeful thing or not. He knew what he was doing. The other thing too was, did you ever hear the story about him calling the cops on himself?
No.
If one of their sexploitation movies wasn't doing good, they'd call the Catholic Legion of Decency and have the cops show up and they'd picket the place and things. That's why I love these guys. I mean, these guys are like the true pioneers of the business. I mean, you talk to Gary Kent, and Gary Kent will tell you the biker film was the film that saved independent cinema because nobody had ever done that before. And they were cheap, easy to make, and there was plenty of guys they could throw in there.
Yeah, he was. Did he do stunts?
Gary started off as a stunt man, but then started actually,
he did a lot of things.
He was playing a heavy in a lot of stuff too. He was in Steckler's The Thrill Killers as a psycho. He was the good guy in Satan Sadists. That was like supposedly the ultimate biker film, and the weird part was all the bikers turned out to be director, like Bud Cardos, stuntman and director, and actor. Gary, stuntman, director, writer, and actor. Graydon Clark, actor and director. Bob Dix, the same thing. So it's amazing what came out of some of this stuff.
Yeah, and Gary Kent, he has an interesting credit. He was in Targets, right? Peter Bogdanovich's movie.
Yeah, he was dressed as the chick that got shot on the highway.
Right.
He also got arrested too because they were shooting without a permit, and he goes, somebody called the cops because they were doing this shit. He's dressed as a chick. He runs down the highway and takes the bump, and somebody else takes the bump. And then somebody called the cops, and by the time, the cops got there, everybody in charge disappeared, and he got arrested or fined or something.
That's awesome.
Gary's a good guy. I talk to him all the time. He's always on Facebook and stuff.
So talk a little bit more about Gary Kent.
Well, I originally met Gary Kent at Cinema Wasteland. It was the first Cinema Wasteland I went to where I had a panel because they wanted to do a Grindhouse panel. I had him and Ted Michaels. And I'd known Ted, before I had met Gary, and Ted's a great guy too. But, I got friendly with Gary, had him on my show a lot. I had him, I brought him out myself. He doesn't know I paid the flight, which is irrelevant, but we wanted him to get out there because he was having health problems, which he's since resolved. But I mean, the man wrote a book, Shadows and Light, which everybody should pick up because it's a great, great journal of independent filmmaking, from the 60s up until the time, he decided to hang it. Not that he hung it up. I mean, the weird part is he's working a lot more now. He just did a movie for Todd Sheets called Bonehill Road. He's been bouncing around doing all this indie stuff for people. And, he's just a great guy. And like one of those guys, like I never, ever sat down with him, Ted, or any of these guys and walked away without learning something in the process, which was great. I'm hoping we get Gary out to Wasteland again, because he's getting up there in years. I mean, damn, Bud Cardos is 90 and he's still working. I called up, Bud had a film he thought I might be interested in, so I called him up and he goes, call me back in a half hour. I'm putting a window on my trailer out in the desert. I'm like, you're 90 years old and you're putting a window in your trailer. And he's still working. I think he was flying down to South Africa to do the second unit stuff. Here's a trivia fact for you. Did you know that Bud was a second unit director on The Wild Bunch?
I did not know that.
The Wild Bunch was another one of the most influential films made. When you think of what Night of the Living Dead did in 1968 and what The Wild Bunch did in 1969, those were two films that basically changed the course of filmmaking because everybody's copied the Peckinpah, slow motion dance of death.
Oh, yeah.
And that was another film that, let's see, you're talking 69. I was 16 years old. I didn't have my license yet. I had heard about The Wild Bunch. Critics were shitting all over it. I got to go see this thing. So I took a bus down to that theater I told you about, the Embassy Theater, and it had a panoramic screen. And I sat there and I was completely fucking blown away by what I saw. Movie ended. I got up, went to the payphone, called my mother up and said, I'll be late for dinner. I'm sitting through this again. And that's what I did. That's how much this film affected me. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then, you're going down the road of how much people ripped it apart and, trashed it for its violence and shit like that. It was an anti-violent film. Yeah. Nobody at that point had ever shown what happens when a bullet really fucking hits you. It was always like, oh, I grab my chest and fall down and death is so nice. No, it's fucking nasty and brutal. And Sam was the first guy to address that. But as much as The Wild Bunch was the film that redeemed his career, it also destroyed his career too, because all anybody wanted out of Sam was this fucking violent shit, which he wasn't really into.
Yep.
His two favorite films were The Ballad of Cable Hogue and Junior Bonner, which were completely nonviolent films.
Oh, I love Junior Bonner.
So in order to pay the bills, he had to crank it up a notch with other shit, you know?
Yeah, I love Ballad, and I really love Junior.
It was a great film. It was a great character study.
What I really like that people tend to miss about Peckinpah, too, is that it's not just the violence.
Yeah.
What was great about him was he took a look at masculinity in a very honest way. In other words, there were moments of cowardice, there were moments of anger, there were moments of pride, and there were moments of insecurity for all of the main characters. They could be good and bad at the same time, but there was a code of friendship. But what I thought was really neat was that he always talked about the losers. Really, his movies are usually about the people who are marginalized. They're running out of time. They're losing against a much bigger system, and they're given one last kick in the dirt about it. And that is what I think really made his movies so strong, was that the characterizations felt so real. Those could be my uncles. Those could be my dad. You know, all of that stuff was really, really cool.
All right. I don't know if you know the story behind the Wild Bunch, who was involved in this whole thing. What happened was, it was a friend of Lee Marvin's who wrote the treatment originally. And Lee had turned Sam onto it. You know, don't forget, all these guys were power drinkers too, so they all hung out at night. Mm-hmm. So Lee was really, really, really wanted to do this. Lee was going to be Pike Bishop. But what happened was, his agent got a hold of, I guess it was Warner Brothers, who, you know, distributed it, and says, look, Lee just did The Dirty Dozen, he just did The Professionals. I don't think he should do another violent action film. So guess what Lee got stuck with instead of the Wild Bunch? Paint Your Fucking Wagon. And we all know how that ended up. Nobody even went to see the damn thing. So, you know, when Sam had first started out, he had done Ride the High Country, which got really high marks. And there he had Warren Oates, L.Q. Jones, John Davis Chandler, R.G. Armstrong, John Anderson, and a couple other people. Then he used the same guys for Major Dundee. Now, you know, I don't want to go into the whole Major Dundee fiasco because you can read the book.
Oh, yeah.
When it came time for the Wild Bunch, one of his second choices was Robert Mitchum, which I didn't think would work. I could see Lee Marvin doing it, but I couldn't see Mitch doing it because Mitch is a great actor, but he sleepwalks through a lot of things. You know, he's slow with that. So basically, they settled on ex-Golden Boy, William Holden, who really needed a comeback. And, you know, they had, you know, for Robert Ryan, they had brought in, who what people didn't know was he had just been diagnosed with lung cancer. So he was on the way out. Edmund O'Brien was brought in. He was nearly blind, but gave it his all. And then they got Ben Johnson, who was a real cowboy. Warren Oates was part of the stock company. Strother Martin and L.Q. Jones, who were the best of friends. Well, actually, if you look at the whole thing, and L.Q. even said this, that they decided to play the Bounty Hunters as gay guys. Yeah. Not overtly gay, but subtly gay. And Sam said, okay, yeah, it'll work. And, you know, they had worked this whole thing in. So the sad part was 10 years after the Wild Bunch, Strother was gone, Edmund O'Brien was gone, Holden was gone, Ryan was gone. Most of them were gone. We had tried at Wasteland to try to get like a Peckinpah reunion going. At the time, Ernie Borgnine and R.G. Armstrong were still alive. They passed away. L.Q. Jones didn't get the whole concept of the convention, so he didn't want to do it. And we tried to get Bo Hopkins, but his agent fucked it up. So that was the whole deal with that. You know, unfortunately, you know, Sam had his booze problems, and then Warren Oates turned him on the coke. And that sort of, you know, Sam was only in his 50s when he died, and so was Warren. So, you know, that's really bad shit, which, you know, also goes back to 42nd Street because there was so much fucking blow and weird drugs around in the 70s. I mean, you had, you know, coke was coming in. Coke was more of an 80s thing, but it was still there at the end of the 70s. You had fucking PCP, which drove people crazy. You had all kinds of, you know, you had the weed, you had the uppers, you had the downers, you had all kinds of other shit. So there was like, you know, add the whole, you know, the overall craziness of 42nd Street, and you had, you know, the plethora of weird drugs that were going with it. You know, then when we hit the 80s and the crack came out, it's like, gee, PCP was so bad, so we decided to replace it with something worse, crack. Right. So that, you know, started the whole thing, and then that's where people were like afraid to go into places. But, you know, going back, you know, I wasn't really never afraid to go in anywhere. I just, you know, don't go in the men's room.
I remember, I think it was back in 1984, Michael Weldon, the psychotronic guy, did a magazine piece in Rolling Stone called Night Creatures, where he talked about going on to 42nd Street and going in the Selwyn, and how it was, I think the bathroom was right beneath the screen. And whenever something really violent would come on, a bunch of trench coat guys would get up and go into the bathroom. So yeah, it sounds like the bathrooms are probably some of the worst areas to go. Now, you were in these places. Did certain theaters specialize in certain types of movies? Like, did the Selwyn usually show horror, the Victory usually show softcore, or was it just a hodgepodge all the time?
Well, I remember the Liberty was always had like, Make Them Die Slowly was slapped on the Liberty. Then, they had Dr. Butcher, and then what the hell was it? The Franco one, Barbed Wire Dolls was a frequent replay. The Victory was the big porn house. The Antco on the corner was a shithole that you didn't want to go into. They switched to porn eventually. You know what it was? When porn hit mainstream after Deep Throat, that was where the fucking money was. So a lot of these theaters that weren't doing shit, would do that. And the other thing was any available space that was left around was picked up by the boys, what I'm talking about.
Right.
And really long multi-year leases were taken out on these places. And, they would make these shoebox theaters, loft theaters, all kind, they were showing everything. I mean, you walk down 42nd Street, movie theater, adult bookstore, cheap electronics store, liquor store, movie theater. Repeat. Then there was shit going on upstairs, massage parlors. People were actually shooting porn in basements on lofts in 42nd Street. Some of your scummier people. One weird story I remember, I don't even know why this popped into my fucking head about a month ago when I was working on my book. The guy who invented the peeps was a guy named Martin Hodas. And he was a hustler that was working around the area. And he was down on I think it was 11th Avenue, and some guy had a bunch of these beat up Nickelodeons and said to Marty, I think a smart guy like you could make money with these. So what he did was he outfitted them with these nudie loops and split beaver loops from California and stuff like that. And they stuck them in these stores. And they all of a sudden started turning money. Well, then one day he showed up and the machines were outside on the curb. And guess what? The mob moved in. So he basically had to pay homage to the mob. But what that did was it opened up other places for him to put machines. Now, there was this whole weird demographic on 42nd. There was a guy named Bobby Soretsky who owned a whole bunch of these weird little bookstores. And Soretsky, Hodas, and a couple of the guys were involved in a murder for hire deal, which never came to fruition. But, when we were in high school, we're horny teenagers going over there trying to buy smut. And there was really no hardcore out in the open at that point. But if they knew you had money, they would take you in the back room and let you browse. Well, this guy Soretsky, I saw a picture of him, and then I realized that I went to one of these joints. He approached me because I made it known that, we're looking for, harder stuff. He put his arm around me and waltzed me into the back room. But what I didn't realize, he was frisking me to see if I was a cop. Well, he took me in the back room and I paid probably $20 for this $5 book that, we passed around, and that was it. And that's the way it worked. So I basically met a guy who was, part of that whole deal, who shot kiddie porn in a fucking basement over there and was up on, a murder for hire deal. I always said, you can be sitting at one of these bars and you never know who the fuck you're drinking with. That's for sure.
So you mentioned before, no doubt the audience and the customers at any given time in 42nd Street could be pretty much anybody, and at times could be really dangerous. You mentioned that the drugs are coming in, and I guess what I wanted to find out was kind of what a typical crazy audience was like when you went into some of these grindhouses. Because I heard that at the Lyric, someone threw a refrigerator off the balcony because they edited out all the good parts to Andy Milligan's Bloodthirsty Butchers. Did you ever see any outstanding audience participation during movies?
I heard about the refrigerator, but I don't know if it was about anything being edited out, because if they were edited out, see, there was another little phenomenon that people don't realize, that projectionists would clip certain scenes out and sell them to private collectors to make extra money. So that would happen because there's certain scenes missing from certain films today that nobody seems to be able to come up with. I've seen fights break out. if you read the last issue of Grindhouse Purgatory, I was in there with this chick I was hanging out with who was all wired on fucking diet pills, Black Beauties or whatever the fuck they were. And somebody started with her and she wouldn't back off and they're screaming and yelling and shit like that. Then we got kicked out. And luckily we're out in the back alley behind the thing. And I saw the door to another theater open up, an exit door, and we snuck in there and finished off the night. But Friday weekends were the more nutty things because, they would talk back to the screen. People would talk back to the screen. Tell the killer where the victim's hiding, shit like that. There was something that Carter Stevens told the story about. Some black guy was in a balcony and some other guy was down below, and they started a screaming match between each other. And the one guy that was down below ran up, and the other guy threw him off the fucking balcony. And then the screen would be pelted with all kinds of shit too at times. God, there was all kinds of weird shit going on. The porn theaters were the real worst ones, though. Seating was based on avoidance because it got so weird. When you got into the 80s, because they started coming up with these extreme porn films that Avon put out, like Taming a Rebecca and things like that. And, you'd be sitting there watching a movie and all of a sudden you'd hear something behind you and this guy was sitting behind you jerking off. So there was just a lot of weird fucking shit going on. If you were smart, you didn't get yourself roped up in it. Like I never scored drugs off anybody on 46, or I never bought weed, but I go around a couple of blocks up where we called it Chiba Street. And you'd buy Chiba weed because that was pot named after Sonny Chiba based on the Street Fighter.
Right.
That fucking movie was so over with the people on 42nd Street that they actually named a bag of weed after Sonny Chiba called Chiba. And there was always like a line of Jersey plates going down that street to score the weed. So that was another weird phenomenon. Now, how cool you got to be to get a bag of fucking weed named after you,
So you probably saw all the notorious horror films of the time.
Yeah. Pretty much everything I've seen on the big screen with a weird audience.
So you saw Texas Chainsaw?
Yeah. That was a mind blower too. Nobody had ever done anything like that before. But, the weird thing was with Texas Chainsaw, when you watch it again, you'll notice that most of the killings are implied. You really don't see too much going on. But you think you saw a bunch of shit going on. And I met, there's another guy, unfortunately, we just lost Toby Hooper a couple months ago, but, Gunnar Hansen was just a sweetheart of a guy, just a great person, great for the fans and everything. And he never realized up until, he started doing conventions that how over his character was. He just never realized it. After he did, Leatherface, he got approached for The Hills Have Eyes, and he said no. He got approached for a bunch of other things, and he said no. He just had no interest in it because he really didn't know how cool people thought Leatherface was. And, he was a great guy. I miss him. I was in that movie Unconventional with him about Chiller Theater. He was a good guy. He really was. It's a shame that so many of these guys have passed on, that, once you lose them forever, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a terrible how both just about everybody now in Texas Chainsaw, which I consider kind of a modern film, everybody's gone at this point. Now, you mentioned that you saw just about everything on the big screen, and of course, this is a horror show. What movies stood out to you? Because I would have loved to have seen, even though it's not a great movie, 3 on a Meat Hook in the middle of 42nd Street, just because that's like one of the just grimiest movies. It just seems like it'd be perfect to watch in one of those theaters.
The ones that really blew my mind, there was a weird misadvertisement sometimes. Deep River Savages was the first cannibal film, and I didn't see it as Deep River Savages. I saw it on a re-release. It was called Sacrifice and was playing with Autopsy. And we're sitting there and I'm like, holy fuck. Everything was, gross and disgusting. Then we got up into the whole cannibal thing. It was like, holy fuck. And the guy I was with got pissed off and left. Oh, fuck, this is all fucked up shit. I'm getting the hell out of here. He left. I got sucked into Ruggiero Deodato's Jungle Holocaust because it was playing as The Last Survivor. So I thought, oh, cool, a jungle adventure film. How bad can this be? Holy fuck. Nobody ever seen this shit before. Nobody ever done it before. That's why, going back to what you said about, I'm going to make a Grindhouse film. Well, the reason any of this stuff worked was because nobody had ever done it before. That's the simple reason why it worked. I mean, that whole Eli Roth's Emerald fucking Jungle or whatever that piece of shit was, you actually thought that was going to work? That sucked. The cannibal thing ran its course. A lot of these things ran its course. They were like, these genres only lasted a certain amount of years, like the black exploitation stuff. It only lasted about 7 years. Spaghetti westerns, the same thing. They lasted about 7 years. So they all had a short shelf life, but they made an impact. And then they threw in Cannibal Holocaust. And that was holy shit. Oh, yeah.
Shit. Let's talk Cannibal Holocaust.
No one had ever seen anything like that. I was going to see it in Jersey originally because it was playing at this theater close to where I lived, but then it got pulled because of the animal cruelty. So I went to the Liberty and saw it on a Friday night, and I never saw an audience pummeled into submission like I did that night, including myself. People were just fucking stunned. I mean, usually people are yelling back at the screen and shit and everything. No, people were fucking stunned. It just blew fucking people's mind. And you got to remember, too, what I try to tell people is, I didn't see the stuff you guys are seeing on DVDs today that's all been restored and put back together and shit. Every fucking film that you guys see on DVD, I saw in the theater was missing something because of the censors. And also because, all right, we got to squeeze this into a 90-minute running slot. So, all right, a movie like Day of Anger, Lee Van Cleef Spaghetti Western, they clipped 20 minutes off that fucking film to make it 90 minutes to fit in a slot. So that's what we were dealing with. But, we never knew this shit. Nobody ever told us. There was no IMDb. There was no internet. So we never knew. And then the one, Make Them Die Slowly, was probably the most prophetic title ever slapped on a Deuce marquee, because right around that time, that's when everything started dying and getting fucked up and shit. That was very prophetic. Everything was taking an extreme turn, even the porn, because, like I said, Avon Films with their, rape, torture, revenge shit and everything. Everything was taking that weird U-turn to see how far you could push the envelope. And they did. But, aside from that, they were letting the area decay. They weren't putting any money into keeping these theaters up. Some of these theaters, you'd walk in and you'd watch one movie and you want to go home and burn your fucking clothes because, you thought you were bringing some weird disease home with you because the place was that fucking filthy. Your sneakers would stick to the fucking floors. You'd have hookers turning tricks that were all cracked out for like $5. Not that you want to be near them. Really strange fucking times. But that was getting toward the end. And then, when I started working for New York City Liquidators, that was pretty much, it was all boarded up and shot at that state. Basically, they were closing these places at record numbers, especially the porn places, because they had the AIDS thing to play with. That's the leverage they needed to get rid of. First, they got rid of the gay bathhouses. Then they got rid of the gay theaters. Then the gay cruising scene moved into straight porn theaters. Then what New York City used to do is they put police officers undercover in there and they document sex acts and they use that to close the theater. The Venus, there was no fanfare, no nothing. They just showed up one night and padlocked the place and told everybody to go home. That was it. End of an era. That was it. Bye. And people say, well, you're sorry to see it go. And I said, yeah, but the reality of the situation was home video killed it. And people weren't coming out anymore. And the places were falling into complete disrepair, complete decay. I remember there was one theater, if you went during the day, you could see the sunlight shining through the ceiling. I mean, they weren't keeping the places up. And then, sadly, that was it. Everything went to video, and it was safer, buy a videotape than to go to a damn movie theater.
We're at it sounds like we're at the death of 42nd Street, the Grindhouses. Before we kill it off completely, though, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that showmanship. You had mentioned about like big plywood frontispieces with heads on them and stuff. What I loved about this era of horror and exploitation is how much the coming attractions were pure carny showmanship. So I really loved the I Dismember Mama, Blood Splattered Bride double feature where the coming attraction was a fake news broadcast of someone going berserk at the Bijou. What were some of your favorite trailers? What were ones that when you saw the trailer, you just laughed out loud and said, I got to see this shit?
Beast of Blood was one. Plus, they kept, another thing, too, is they used to use the radio, too, radio spots. Because if you were working in a place where you had an FM radio on all the day, you would hear, oh, one person died in the blood-dripping head transplant. Go see Beast of Blood or Mad Doctor of Blood Island or whatever. They use radio spots. I Drink Your Blood, I Eat Your Skin. I mean, I Eat Your Skin was just a retitled Del Tenney film called Voodoo Bloodbath, but Jerry Gross needed something to slap on to, I Drink Your Blood. So they never showed anything from the black and white film. Of course, they just showed the stuff from, I Drink Your Blood. And that hammered everything out. That was another thing, too, is because a lot of guys never even put the shit up for fucking ratings. Jerry Gross hated the MPAA. You know, Jerry Gross did I Drink Your Blood, Ate Your Skin, Zombie, I Spit on Your Grave, all that shit. He was Cinemation, then he was Jerry Gross Organizations. A lot of these guys, I mean, when they put out Carnivorous, which is a retitle of Jungle Holocaust, not Jungle Holocaust, yeah, it was a retitled Jungle Holocaust. Nobody watched. Nobody ever submitted that for a fucking rating. They just slapped an R on the damn things. A lot of guys would just slap R's on it and hope they could get away with it. What happened with I Drink Your Blood, though, was they had promised the damn prints out to a whole bunch of theaters with an R rating, and the MPAA slapped an X on them. So the distributor told the theaters, cut the print as you see fit for your community. That's why there was never a complete print of that around until Grindhouse Releasing put it out. One was always missing something. So, and then, you know, the showmanship, they would have monitors out there showing the trailers underneath all that stuff too. I mean, these theaters are like mini museums. They make them die slowly. You had all these figures of natives with bloody spears and shit, stills, lobbies, one sheets. I mean, it was incredible what I'm wondering what happened to some of that shit. It never resurfaced. I mean, these huge plywood, you know, facades with monsters and ghouls, and then they use it for the sex stuff too. So pretty much, you know, you didn't need advertising. All you had to do was walk by the damn theater and it would suck you in.
Yeah, I remember those were still around in the mid 80s because I would sit there and look at what was on the TV. And some of that stuff was like R-rated. You know, you'd walk by and you'd see tits and be like, holy shit, I can't believe they're showing.
Yeah, the porn theaters were a whole different story, though. They honestly didn't give a fuck because, you know what it was, too? And Terry Levine was the one who came out with this. The problem was, where the city really wanted this shit gone, if these people had paid their taxes, nothing would have happened. But nobody was paying taxes, property taxes, sales tax, income tax. Nobody was paying nothing. They would close one store down and would open up a week later, you know, under the same management with a new guy running it. And, you know, I never remembered, you know, paying any sales tax over there. And when you got a movie ticket, it was pretty much on the movie ticket how much tax you paid for the legit theaters. But with the porn theaters, you just handed them the fucking money and walked in. So all that shit was going south. So that was the big problem, was for the square footage of that area, the money didn't add up. And that's another reason why they wanted to get rid of it, because Disney offered them big fucking dollars too to get out of there. So that was it. And then when you go by your porn theaters, a lot of them had switched to this whole, you know, 3 or 4 features, 60-minute features, like the stuff I put out, you know, through alternative cinema for $1.99. So this was a great place for homeless people to crash for the night. It was $1.99 during the day that went up to $5 at night. And that's why they called the Venus the Hobo Hilton, because people would sleep there. And, you know, the 3 films, half the time, you never even know what the fuck you were getting. It just said 3 nonstop films, the harem, 4 nonstop films. So you never knew what you were getting into. And some of these films had been cut and spliced so many times that, like, you'd be watching one film and all of a sudden, hey, this is a whole different fucking movie. So that's how weird the whole scene was over there. Plus, you know, the whole porn scene was too. A lot of these people, they lived in New York. Vanessa Del Rio, Jamie Gillis, Harry Reams, Samantha Fox, Sharon Mitchell, Long Gene Silver, all of them. And you know, Carter Stevens was a director. You know, he did a bunch of stuff over there. Weird thing is, Carter and me grew up in the same town and didn't know each other. He's like a few years older than I am. He went to a different high school. So we were almost neighbors. And I'll tell you something, with a lot of these people, and I'm going to put a shameless plug out here, Long Gene Silver is one of the nicest women I ever met, and she's having financial problems right now because she's just got evicted 2 months before fucking Christmas, because she's a Section 8 and the government's paying it, and they raised the rent and the government ain't covering. So they got a fundraiser for her on the Rialto Report and on Facebook. So if anybody's listening to this and would like to really help out, a really nice lady who has a lot of health problems and has done a lot of shit for everybody else, Gene Silver on Facebook or the Rialto Report, you know, they're taking donations. They're trying to help her out. You know, she's helped me out in the past. And, you know, the weird thing about everybody shits all over porn people. Some of these people are the nicest people I ever met and the nicest people I ever dealt with. I mean, you know, you do certain shit for a living to survive. That's what you got to do. You know, who is anybody to judge anybody, of course, but we live in a very judgmental fucking world.
Definitely. And when we're done here, I certainly do want to make sure that we have links to all of that. You know, what we talked about before, you know, you're talking about 42nd Street. And obviously, I didn't have 42nd Street as a young kid, but I had the drive-in. And we had the Dusk to Dawn shows. And it was an interesting what they would throw into Dusk to Dawn shows. You may have a GP movie, you may have a hard R by the end of the night, and it would kind of drive my dad insane sometimes. But that was also kind of disappeared about the same time. Video killed quite a bit of not only 42nd Street, but also drive-ins. One of the drive-in movies that just really freaked me out as a kid was Kingdom of the Spiders. William Shatner, directed by John Bud Cardos. Now, he directed King of the Spiders, and he did The Dark. He took over, I think, for Tobe Hooper, who left that movie. Yeah. He's an actor and a stuntman. And you've been friends with him. You just told us about how at 90 years old, he's installing Windows. Any good stories from Bud about those crazy days?
Bud wrote a book. I think it's called Action or something like that. But what Bud didn't put in the book was he beat up Tex Watson from the Manson family. Huh. I mean, I could tell you that story because he forgot to tell it. They were shooting on the Span Ranch where Al Adamson shot a lot of his stuff. And Bud was directing something. And Tex Watson was lurking around bothering one of the girls. So Bud walked up to him and said, "Hey, look, I'm shooting a movie here. You're bothering my people. You know, leave." Okay. 5 minutes later, he's back. Well, Tex had these big 6-shooters on his hips, like a cowboy. So Bud's like a no-nonsense, I don't take any shit type of guy. I told you fucking once. He grabs Tex by the neck and by the seat of his pants and tosses the fucker in a ravine. All of a sudden, he hears all these gunshots, and he turns around and he goes, "Those fucking guns were real. If I had known that, I would have never done that."
Shit.
And Gary had told me that they had hired Manson to work on the dune buggies, and they were doing some. I don't know what movie it was, but they kept having their dune buggies or something breaking down. And one of those clowns on the Span Ranch said that Manson was a half decent mechanic, so they hired him to do something, and he started like stiffing him on the whole deal. So I think they surrounded him and said, "You got till noon to make this fucking truck run, or you got a problem." So. He got it running. Gary said they never got involved with that whole crew because they were trying to lure these guys up there with these, grungy chicks to, get them into the whole, scene that was going on. But he says none of us ever fucking bothered with them. Those chicks were too scuzzy.
So I wanted to ask a question about another guy that you mentioned earlier, another exploitation legend.
You wanted to talk about Ted Michaels. Ted never got his due. Ted did a lot of stuff, made a lot of good movies. Ted knew what he was doing. Little known story that he had something to do with children couldn't play with dead things. Yep. He came on the set and wanted to see the dailies. The dailies sucked. He says, "Get rid of all this shit. I have to show you people how to light the scenes." All those scenes of the zombies popping out of the ground and shit with that light in the background, that was all Ted. Ted loved the film. Of course, he was shooting on a shoestring. He was in debt. But he would keep on doing stuff, paying them off one credit card to another. I've had Ted on my show many a times. Great guy. Toward the end of his life, he was in a lot of pain. He was on a scooter. I call him up and I talk to him and he goes, "Oh yeah, I really miss not being able to lift weights and I'm hurting." He goes, "But I just got this camera and you won't believe this camera." And he'd be like a little kid about this camera. The guy basically was shooting movies up until the day he passed away. He just that's what he wanted to do and that's what he did. And I would have to say I've been more entertained by his stuff in the past 10 years than any of this other stuff that came out. I mean, granted, some of it's hokey and stuff like that. But Ted works with what he has, and he makes it work. And we had shown Corpse Grinders down at the Pioneer Theater, one of the last films we shown down there before that folded up. And I got the brilliant idea to have him call in and introduce the film over the speakerphone, which really worked, and he was really happy about that. So another good guy. I mean, he made classic stuff. I mean, that, when you're talking about the Dusk Till Dawn drive-in stuff, what about the Spend the Night in the Grave, Death Dimension, Corpse Grinders, Undertaker and His Pals and the Embalmer, or the Worm Eaters, depending on where you went. So, yeah, that was a big part of it, too.
So when we talked earlier about the ingredients that made, Grindhouse happen when it happened, talked about 42nd Street in the theaters and the kinds of movie that were being made, but it was also talking about New York. New York as a character. And when I remember New York at the time, and it kind of has a different feel now. I went back to visit 2007, 2017, and there's a little bit of something that's missing, not just the visuals, but New York was kind of a complete hustler town. In the late 70s and 80s, it was kind of like every level of business and the government and the vendors, everybody was running hustles. And, the city government was running hustles and laws and ordinances, and everybody else was working around kind of creative ways to get around that. And you were involved with one of the places that I think kind of just feels so much like the spirit of that old New York, and that was New York City Liquidators. Can you tell the story of New York City Liquidators and Norman Brill?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had heard about Norman before I met him. There was a place on Broadway called Norman's House of Deals. And Norman was involved with horse racing. He had a couple ponies. And I knew another guy who was had a meat packing plant who had ponies. And he told me he knew this guy who had 27-inch sharp TVs, color TVs for, I forget the price, but they were going to be a lot cheaper than in a store. So he told me to meet him at 7 o'clock, drive over there. Oh, you can't go in the store. Just give me the money and I'll go in and help the guy bring him out. Well, I knew the deal. He probably tacked on $25 a set. That was the way you did business back then. I didn't give a fuck. I was still getting the deal. So that was Norman's House of Deals on Broadway. Also the site of the phony Rolex bust, because Norman was into a lot of crooked shit. So what happened was he was selling phony Rolexes, and when they busted him, they dumped all the Rolexes out on the street in front of the store and went over them with a steamroller. That was his first bust, and he wound up getting regulated to some, he was in some little shithole that I never went to, but what happened was, like I said, I went into business for myself. I saw when home video came out, I saw money in it, and I wanted to get in. And of course, the money is in the porn. So I would bounce from guy to guy, trying to get, porn tapes from my store and porn tapes to hustle, and then regular movies from my store. Well, I ran into this one guy who said he could get new releases. So I said, really? Give me a list. So I looked down the list and I go, get me 10 of everything. So I called up a guy who owned a chain of stores and I said, I can get you this shit. And I'm making $3 a tape. Well, the guy shows up with these new releases and they're in Amaray fucking cases. I'm like, they're fucking bootlegs, dude. I said, I can't fucking sell this shit. Oh, man, go get him yourself, motherfucker. We had a big fucking fight and the guy stormed out. Fuck you. Okay, fine. So somebody else was there, goes, why don't you just go over and get the shit yourself? I said, well, where'd he go? And he goes, he's at New York City Liquidators on West 27th Street. I said, I'm always on West 27th Street. Where is he? Because I used to buy, stuff up on top, electronics and shit, because I was a hustler myself. But he was down at the bottom toward the Fashion Institute. So I'm like, all right, I went in there one Sunday, met this short little old man, looked old. He was in it. I guess he was in his 50s then. Told him what I did. He gave me a deal, and I kept going back. Well, some of the other guys I was dealing with said, you got to watch it over there. I said, why? He goes, well, he's being watched. He's doing bootleg tapes. And I said, I didn't see any bootleg tapes. And he said, there's shit behind the counter under glass. It's all bootlegs. So I'm like, fuck, I didn't know that because I bought a Document of the Dead and it, looked fine, played fine, no problem. So, yeah, the feds were watching him. So then I saw the stuff. And I also saw the deterioration of the stuff, too, because when they first started doing it, it was really hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. But then what happened was somebody brought in a shitload of cheap blank tapes, and these guys jumped on them and started copying the damn movies on these cheap blank tapes. Well, they kept coming back, returns, this and that and the other thing. It was a fucking debacle. So they finally straightened that out, but Thursday was new release day, and I'd go over there to pick up, my stuff or whatever. I wasn't into the bootlegs. I was into used movies and porn. That was my money. I didn't want to get involved in this shit. These guys were lined up 6 deep at the counter, grabbing these new releases that the ink on the box was still wet. So, all right. So one day I'm in there. He's all nervous about something, and I says, what's the matter? He goes, it's a bunch of heat going on, this and that and the other thing. I'm like, he goes, go in the back room. You want any of those fucking bootlegs? Take them for a fucking $1. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm like, well, I can use the boxes because I can match them up with some of the tapes I got with no boxes. So for $1, I bought $100 worth to make him happy. So go back, come back the next week. It's busy. He's got Fantasia on the fucking counter. I'm like, what are you, out of your fucking mind? So, okay, somebody got paid off, obviously. So I got there early one morning, and one of his guys is out in front. And this, you understand something, too. A lot of his help, they were doing drugs. So this guy was all coked up and he's going, yeah, fuck Norman, fuck this guy. Jesus Christ, I'm fucking sick of this shit. Why is this guy getting paid more than I am? And he goes, I could fuck all these guys. He goes, I could turn them all in for the reward. $10,000 a piece, I'd be home free. And I'm like, I didn't fucking hear that. Don't want to hear it. So, all right, one day, I was working somewhere and somebody calls me up and he goes, turn on Channel 7 News. I turn on the fucking news and I'm like, holy fuck, they got him. Camera crew on New York City Liquidators are marching all these guys out in cuffs. I'm like, shit, they finally fucking nailed his ass. So I'm like, all right. So I didn't know what the hell was going on. 2 weeks later, I'm up on top of 27th Street at one of my, picking up some stuff, and somebody goes, hey, Norman's open. So I'm like, okay, fuck, I got to go down and see him. So I go down and I walk in and I go, dude, I feel bad. I go, anything I can do? And he goes, no, I really appreciate you coming down and checking me out and shit. And he goes, you're a true friend. And he goes, you can do me a favor. Go flag the garbage truck up the street. I'm like, okay. I walk up to the garbage truck. I say, hey, the guy in Liquidators wants to see you. Some money changes hands. All of a sudden, they're carting out all the shit the FBI didn't take away that they missed because they never looked under anything. Boxes, tapes, the whole bit. So, all right, we're doing that. And then my tenure when I had my video store was coming to an end because I had a scumbag landlord. So basically, I wasn't selling that good anyway. The prices were dropping. Things weren't too good. So I was pretty much out and really not doing anything. So he goes, listen, we're going down to the East Coast Video Show, and I want to take you as my guest. And I'm like, all right. And I'm thinking, he ain't taking me as his guest. Something's up. So we go down there. He's got this Asian kid named Zito working the adult section. So they're down there to sell. So, all right, the first night I'm down there, this fucker ain't doing nothing. So I walked over to Norman and I go, seriously? I go, this is guy selling shit? And he goes, now you know why you're here. Show me what you can do. Well, I went into fucking mode and basically sold 3/4 of the shit he came down with in 2 days. He goes, I want you to come in to work for me. I said, dude, I live in Lake Apatcon. That's like 3 hours away. This ain't going to happen. But I'm thinking I got to make this fucking happen because I got no money coming in. So what I did was I hooked up a deal to have an illegal apartment close to the city, and I started commuting in. So I became his right-hand man as far as the X-rated department was because this kid wasn't doing shit, and then there was a bunch of stuff going on. He got real jealous of me making money because I like to hustle. The phone would ring, he'd pick it up. Oh, yeah, what do you want? One case, fine, bang. I pick up the phone. What do you want? Oh, well, maybe you want this. And I'd fucking be selling shit. He was getting pissed. So he let it slip that he was going to try to pull something on me. And I said, basically, you just advertise what you're fucking doing. And I says, this guy's real quick about pulling a fucking knife out of his back pocket shit. I go, but I don't need a fucking audience. I said, we'll go downstairs, and when we're on the last fucking step, I'm going to kick your fucking head off your shoulders. So that got stopped real quick, but the guy, he basically left, and I got stuck with the whole thing. And then I found out something that I said, I'm not going to take the fucking job, not for what you're paying me now. So I found out that Norman basically paid you on the basis of what he thought you were going to steal from him. So I got this from his fucking bookkeeper cousin. So I walked up and I says, look, this is what I want. And I said, I don't want to pay for any of my shit. He goes, what do you mean? I says, I brought you a bunch of accounts in here that basically they got shit I want to own. And I said, I don't want to pay for it. And he goes, as long as it doesn't affect me, I don't care what you do. So basically, I never paid for fucking shit when I was working there. And that's how that went down. So unfortunately, though, his health started taking a real tumble. His kidneys went, he was on dialysis. He had a quadruple bypass. They took off part of his left foot. But this is when we're hitting our stride because he made a bunch of connections for stuff that basically wasn't supposed to get here. It was supposed to be destroyed. So he was hooked up with all these guys. I mean, come on, we all know the mob controls half of this shit. And these people used to come in, and I'm not a fucking dummy. I know who they are. I kept my mouth shut, and I made money because I didn't talk. And I was a reliable guy, and I was a stand-up guy. So pretty much we were on the cusp of taking over the DVD business in Manhattan when he brought back this fucking guy who had robbed him. And I was supposed to be doing Chiller Theater. We were shooting that movie called Unconventional, and this will haunt me till the day I die, that I had a fucking screaming match with him over the fucking phone about how I'm trying to keep this place afloat while you're sick and you bring back this fucker who basically was robbing you fucking blind. Now I got to go do this and, fuck you. Well, that weekend he died. And I felt like shit after that. I went back. I helped him liquidate the store. His family, they were scumbags. They basically tossed them in a fucking box in the ground. They would just put money in their pockets. And whatever I was supposed to get, I never got and had to help myself at the time. And pretty much that was the end of it. It was like the end of a fucking era. I mean, to me, that was the end, the true end of New York for me, because that same year he died, the last peep show on 42nd Street closed, and Screw Magazine folded up. To me, that was the complete end of everything. And that was the end of that shit. So then, I just, started my own stuff, kept it going, whatever I could. And then as we segued into stuff here, I decided I wanted to put out my own line of DVDs. And I went into Mike Razzo's office and I said, I want to do 8mm shit, but I want to do it the right way, because everybody just throws shit out with no rhyme or reason, no backstory, no nothing. I said, there's a history involved in this. And he looked at me and he goes, everybody wants to do shit, but nobody wants to put their money where their mouth is. I threw an undisclosed amount of cash on the desk. I said, match it and we're in. And 12 years later, we're still in. And we started doing this shit. So that's about where I'm at right now. I'm still doing this shit, putting stuff out.
If there's one person from the Grindhouse era that you didn't get to meet, who was it that you'd want to meet?
Lee Van Cleef.
Yes.
Lee Van Cleef is a personal hero of mine. I always liked his stuff. He's a Jersey boy, great history. The man was a lot better actor than people would realize. And unfortunately, they never saw it in the States. He had quit acting altogether. Sergio Leone was looking for another American actor to put in the second Clint Eastwood film. And he was looking at Henry Fonda, who never heard of Sergio Leone and didn't want nothing to do with it. He approached Lee Marvin. Lee was interested, but then got cat blue. He approached James Coburn, but Coburn was going to hold him up for more money. So as the legend goes, Lee had quit acting. Lee was painting. Sergio Leone was in a bar with his entourage one night, and Lee Van Cleef walked in out of a rainstorm. He recognized Lee from High Noon, walked up to Lee. A deal was cut. Supposedly, it was $15,000 in a valise, and that's how they got the deal for a few dollars more. And Lee went to Italy, did the film, and if you look at For a Few Dollars More, it is not Eastwood's film, it's Van Cleef's film. That resuscitated his career, and he stayed in Italy and, when Eastwood left, he became the king of the spaghetti westerns. Problem was, him and Kinski stayed there too long. If they had gone back to America a little bit earlier than they had, they would have been as big as Eastwood or Bronson. Not that Lee wasn't big in the States, but he would have been a lot bigger. So yeah, that would have been the one guy I would have really liked to meet.
So yeah, this brings us to where you are now and Grindhouse Purgatory.
You want to know about Grindhouse Purgatory?
Grindhouse Purgatory.
Okay, what happened was, do you remember Andy Kopp?
Yes.
Andy Kopp, Ed Demko, and a couple other guys really wanted to resuscitate Screw Magazine. We really wanted to resuscitate Screw Magazine. So we were all going to do this stuff. I tried to find out who owned the damn thing. I came up with somebody who basically wanted $150K for the name, which there's no fucking way I even have $150K. Not that, I probably could have gotten it if I wanted to, but something was wrong about it. A couple guys that worked for Screw, Chip Maloney, Eric Danville, guys I was still in contact with, told me, stay the fuck away. It's poison. Don't go near it. Nobody knows what's going on. I actually wrote for the revised version, but that folded up too. But I got my name on the cover, which was cool. So unfortunately, Andy Kopp passed away. And what we wanted to do was we decided to put out a magazine in his memory called Grindhouse Purgatory. Originally, it was supposed to be a one-shot deal, and that was it. And that's all I ever intended. Well, people sort of liked it, so I did a second issue. Now, the whole thing with me is, could I sit there and write the whole magazine myself? Yeah. But I have to look at it this way. If Something Weird Video didn't give me the opportunity, if Al Goldstein had let me in the office to do research, if Frank Henenlotter hadn't thought so highly of my work to push me, where would I be? I'd be fucking nowhere. So I opened the door to people to come in and write, whether you had experience or not, because there's a lot of people out there that actually know how to write but can't get work. Not that this is a paying gig. So there's a lot of films that I don't really give a shit about, like karate films. I mean, I've seen the basics, but people want to read about that. So one of the guys on my magazine, Ken Brunette, is a big karate fan. Let him do the karate. I needed what I would call the psycho bitch from hell because I wanted to have a woman involved. Well, I had one originally, but something, wires got crossed and it wasn't working out. And then she quit in a huff because, I can say this on the air, she basically wanted me to fuck her and I wouldn't do it. I don't play that game. So, things progressed, things shifted. I have what I would consider a very good little core of writers right now. I asked Dr. Rhonda Bauman to come in, which she did, and she's good. I got another girl, Josephine Ann Loren, who writes horribly nasty fucking fiction stories. I have Dave Koseki from Liquid Cheese, who does a little bit of the porn. I have Bill Adcock and a bunch of other guys. And basically, I let these guys do whatever the fuck they want to do as long as we haven't done it before. And like I say, nobody's getting paid for this shit. It's a labor of love. And unbeknownst to me, we're up to, 10 fucking issues already, working on number 11. It's paying for itself. Like I said, nobody's making any money off it, but the writers get a copy of the magazine, and if I got, if we made a little extra, a couple DVDs or whatever I can kick out. I mean, would I like to see the thing get where I could pay everybody off? Sure, who wouldn't? But would I want to be in a fucking Barnes and Noble or something like that? No, because I already know creative fucking accounting and distribution. And I refuse to be fucked over. And a lot of guys, give me this whole thing. Well, can I get a complimentary copy of your magazine? Why? It's only $8 fucking. Support the cause. That's why I don't have a website. I don't have anything. I mean, even with my DVDs, I got ripped off by torrent sites and it took a big chunk of change out of my pocket. For me to give out free shit to somebody to throw it up on fucking eBay and sell it or just read it, poo-poo it off. Yeah, sure. I got my detractors. Sometimes I piss people off. Originally, I was using a couple issues of that magazine for a platform to get even with people, but I stopped that. When you're a minor, and I'm not even saying, I've never considered myself a fucking celebrity or anything fucking special. Something happened and it worked. I don't get rich off this thing. I had other outside, things I was doing that made me money. Any advice I can give to anybody who wants to get into this business is don't give up your fucking day job, because unless you're really fucking lucky or unless you're willing to reach into your own pocket and believe in what you're fucking doing, you're not going to make any money. I got lucky and I'm sort of a halfway decent businessman where I parlayed, certain things into other certain things. My autobiography will be coming out, and if you like these stories I've been spilling for the past hour and a half here, the book's going to be full of them. It's going to be called The Whole Bag of Crazy, and it's in the editing stages right now, and it should be hopefully available by next Wasteland. So, still putting out DVDs. The magazine's still going strong. We're working on a bunch of stuff, but my whole point is, I'm not going to get rich doing that. As long as the magazine doesn't cost me any money, I don't give a fuck. I'm trying to keep what I like alive and what a lot of other people like alive. That's all it is. I'm not looking to get rich off of this fucking thing. I'm not looking, really looking to do anything. And we're having fun writing it. I enjoy writing. I enjoy sharing the stories. And in the interim, we're turning on people to a lot of fucking films they would never know about otherwise. Because a lot of people don't cover what I cover. Shit, I even did something about Bob Mitchum and John Wayne and how they related to Grindhouse in the last issue. So it's a never-ending, I guess, stream of consciousness that I put on paper to keep it going.
Well, great. You just mentioned something really interesting, which is you talk about the things that you love, and you have all the genres represented inside of your book. What I want to do now, it's a lightning round. I'm going to name off one of the subgenres of Grindhouse. You give the 2 movies that who's ever listening needs to see. So we'll start with biker films.
Biker films, Satan Sadists, and Hell's Angels 69.
Blaxploitation.
Oh, you got to see Coffee. And let's see, what was the other one? Black Caesar. Black Caesar was the one.
Nice. Cannibal films.
Oh, Cannibal Holocaust and Make Them Die Slowly. That way you can compare the 2 directors that started it all.
How about Canucksploitation, those Canada tax movies?
Well, you go by Cronenberg, Shivers, and there's another one that nobody seems to have seen. It's called Stone Cold Dead.
How about Carsploitation?
Oh, God. Let's see. Vanishing Point, And I go with Cannonball Run because I liked it.
Nice. How about Mondo films?
Oh, shit, Mondo. Oh, you got to go with the original Mondo Connie. And, by the same director, if you really want to see something completely offensive, Africa Dito, released over here by Jerry Gross again, is Africa Blood and Guts.
Yeah, that one is so freaking. That offended me. Not that that means that there's any problem with it, but that one really took me too far. How about monster movies? Just good old fashioned monster movies.
Oh, monster movies. There's so many great monster movies. I'm going back with the 50s stuff. One of the ones that really, two that really stuck in my mind were The Undead and Beast from Haunted Cave. That's 50s stuff. I mean, we always have monster movies.
Nice. Nazi exploitation.
Ilsa, She-Wolf for the SS, and Love Camp Number 7.
How about nudist films?
Nudist films. I don't know. You go with the Nudie Cuties, the Immortal Mr. T's, and I'm trying to think of another one. God, there was another one called Winter Sports, which was pretty weird. They're all soft-core sexploitation stuff.
How about Ozploitation?
God, there was a bunch. That's the Australian stuff, right?
Right.
Trying to think what they had down there. There was one direct Turkey Shoot was one. It's Trenchard Smith, I believe, but he does better war movies. He does some great war movies. Cars That Ate People, that was another horrible fucking midnight movie, but people seem to dig it.
Rape and revenge films.
Oh, Rape and Revenge. It was funny how they marketed Make Them Die Slowly as a rape revenge film and it really wasn't happening. God, I'm trying to think. There's so many weird fucking rape revenge films out there. Damn, Death Wish would have to be right in there, as a revenge type thing. Then I guess, I Spit on Your Grave could be another one. It's sort of a weird little subgenre that more sort of like applies to porn, like Sex Wish. Sex Wish would be one of those rape revenge things. That's just one of these weird hybrid films where it's hardcore sex, but it's not even fucking arousing. And Harry Reams isn't fucking Charles Bronson.
How about sexploitation?
Oh, sexploitation. I would say Russ Meyer's Up and Beneath the Valley of the Ultravictions would fill that bill very nicely.
Oh yeah, Kit Natividad. That's my baby. Yeah. Spaghetti westerns.
Oh, there's so many of them, but I would say Sabata is a lot of fun. And if you can find this one, it's either called Payment in Blood is one title or Seven Winchesters for a Massacre is another title. And that one's completely off the hook.
How about splatter films?
Splatter, you got the classic, you got Blood Feast, and then Maniac would be another one.
Yeah, I love Maniac. And finally, last but not least, women in prison films.
Oh, women in prison. My two favorites were like The Big Birdcage and The Big Dollhouse.
Nice, Jack Hill. Fantastic. Hey, on that note, let's curb the conversation until next time. And 42nd Street Pete, I want to thank you so much for putting us in a time machine, taking us back to that unique moment in American history.
Well, thank you for having me on. And to all my fans out there, a lot of people, in positions that I'm in, and a lot of people way, higher up on the, the feeding chain than I am, don't say this enough. But hey, I want to thank my fans and my friends out there, because if it wasn't for my fans and the people who buy my stuff, where would I be? That's why I don't charge for autographs or any of this other shit. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for making Grindhouse Purgatory the success that it is. Thanks for buying my DVDs, and thanks for keeping this whole damn thing alive, because maybe 42nd Street is gone, and it is gone, but the films were the lifeblood of those theaters, and they're still around, and they should be preserved and cherished. So, respect your films and respect each other. And, again, there's a lot of people out there that are in the business, like I said, Long Gene Silver and people like that are hurting. So, try to throw a little bit their way too, because even these big companies that are still making money off their shit are basically not doing anything for them. So again, my sincere thanks. Scott, thanks for having me on. We'll have to do it again. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I do appreciate everyone who takes the time. And remember, the grindhouses may be gone, but the spirit of exploitation is alive and well. And if you get a chance to meet any of the old school exploitation directors and actors, take the time to thank them. Let them know that you were a fan of what they did. I can almost guarantee that they're going to be happy to talk with you because the statute of limitations has long passed. Until next time, stay hell-bent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. You can find Hellbent for Horror on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and other podcast platforms. And H4H has its own app. You can download it from the Google or Amazon store for Android, and the iPhone version is available on the iTunes store. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay hell-bent.